Don't take my word for it, go watch his grim interviews from the 90s. When everyone and his uncle knows that blacks were enslaved for centuries, which literally means no access to wealth or property, some were given their own homes, but rarely, demanding evidence for the obvious is very disingenuous. Actually, yes it is, because you see, you segue into the fact that you think previous wealth has a strong effect on current wealth, so I would demand evidence. Could you present cross-generational wealth transfers over the last 60 years and their effect size? That is why you need evidence. See right here, you assumed that past wealth would help you with current wealth while also not being specific. Let's do a lazy rebuttal. Currently first-generation Latino immigrants are performing higher on national average than the native blacks. First-generational Latinos have lower wealth on average than native blacks when they enter the country, as in almost none. Yet first-generation Latinos perform higher than the national average of blacks. See? The problem is way more complicated than that. You assumed that you knew the whole story. You also assumed that wealth has high effect size cross-generationally. It doesn't when accounting for appropriate variables by third generation. Most millionaires' descendants regress to national average. Regression to the mean is a thing. Cross-generational wealth transfers are weaker than people presuppose. So again, your bias is showing, and the presumptive nature of its affect. When everyone and his uncle knows that blacks were enslaved for centuries, which literally means no access to wealth or property, some were given their own homes, but rarely, demanding evidence for the obvious is very disingenuous. So here's a request, find out how much cross-generational wealth affects current outcome, accounting for education attainment, IQ, family structure etc. etc. From my research I believe around 12.3% of the black and white income gap can be explained by lack of fathers in the household from a longitudinal survey. So yes, I would demand evidence. Only idiots think that tells the whole story. Got me? Ian Conway. On the other hand, you've engaged in some mind reading yourself in claiming that the right and left are self-righteous. And, yet, it's true. Do you see how the charge of mind reading is not a valid rebuttal? No, there are tens of thousands of people in these groups, the statistical chance of none of them doing it is none. I never said any specific person was doing it. I never said that you were doing it. Vertical bar. At Ian Conway. Understand this, we are not reading his mind. Actually what we do is interpolate what he says in different interviews, revise his arguments, prove them false, analyze his behavior and choice of words, be attentive when he contradicts himself or where he redefines words to fit his argument, even if that means inventing new meanings that don't actually fit said argument. There's plenty of subcontext in everything he says, from you cannot stop smoking without a supernatural intervention to maybe women shouldn't use makeup in the workplace. One of the best ways to understand that he's full of shit, for example, is going to work and realize you can work perfectly with women independently of their makeup, or talking to someone who has stopped smoking without a supernatural intervention. Basically talk to fucking people. This blame-shifting thing is contradictory to what he professes as a psychologist. If you cannot deal with a pretty woman with makeup, then the problem is you, not her. Peterson and scaremongers create this subtle imaginary that can get past naive people. Or do you think we are all part of a conspiracy against Peterson? I couldn't give two fucks about the guy, but I need to address his hypocrisy and manipulation so that people understand his arguments and ideals are biased and come from frustrated ideology. Don't take my word for it, go watch his grim interviews from the 90s. Are you gonna be specific, just once? There's plenty of subcontext in everything he says, from you cannot stop smoking without a supernatural intervention to maybe women shouldn't use makeup in the workplace. What the fuck? You mean strawman? Holy shit. I watched the Dahunty interview. Those are strawman. Try again, like I would love it. One of the best ways to understand that he's full of shit, for example, is going to work and realize you can work perfectly with women independently of their makeup, or talking to someone who has stopped smoking without a supernatural intervention. Basically talk to fucking people. Holy fucking shit. The straw man is so fucking hard with this. This blame-shifting thing is contradictory to what he professes as a psychologist. If you cannot deal with a pretty woman with makeup, then the problem is you, not her. Peterson and scaremongers create this subtle imaginary that can get past naive people. What are you talking about? You have continued for 3 sentences with this straw man. STFU, you post-truth fucking bitch. Holy shit. If you could accurately attack Jordan Peterson's point, it would be one thing, but lying about your opponent's position is idiotic. Or do you think we are all part of a conspiracy against Peterson? I couldn't give 2 fucks about the guy, but I need to address his hypocrisy and manipulation so that people understand his arguments and ideals are biased and come from frustrated ideology. Don't take my word for it, go watch his grim interviews from the 90s. Okay, let's start with you. 1. You lied about Peterson's position. 2. You don't care yet you spend time on it, that's a fucking lie. 3. Very unspecific fucking claims, gonna back it up. Oh wait, I forgot you're a post-truth bitch. Learn to not strawman. Also, there isn't any fucking conspiracy going on, it's standard discussed sensitivity going on. Let's say I applied any of the standards you applied to Peterson to, say, David Pakman or 3 Arrows, all of your criticism of Peterson would perfectly apply to David Pakman or 3 Arrows. David Pakman, for example, did a piece on IQ, 20 minutes, that got so many things wrong about IQ research, that I was literally pulling my fucking hair out. He didn't look at monozygotic twins' IQ correlation in relation to age. He didn't look at the vast amounts of GWAS. He even ignored the single largest GWAS with an N of 250,000 showing a 10% of intelligence is now correlated to genes. He didn't even cover what G is, like he didn't even cover what fucking G is. You literally cannot talk about IQ, if you don't know what the fuck G is. He didn't talk about how IQ naturally occurred from factor analysis. He made a fucking propaganda piece that is essentially factually incorrect on many things. I don't think David Pakman is a shitty actor, I think, like everyone, he is ideologically blinded. I love how I can fucking watch people that I think have most mental gymnastic bad faith arguments, and still think they are perfectly fine people, like the David Pakman IQ video, while being completely wrong, essentially, terribly disingenuous and ignores relevant science. I still think David Pakman is fine. But I need to address his hypocrisy and manipulation so that people understand his arguments and ideals are biased and come from frustrated ideology. So are you going to apply the same thing to David Pakman? Or 0 books? David Pakman wasn't just little off, he was way off. A correlational value of 0.7 to 0.88 for IQ at adult age in twins isn't exactly, a small effect. Going to call him a dishonest hack and refuse to watch him? Oh, of course not. Why would you? Neither of your examples attempted to answer prayers to provide a solution to the problems. Neither side has a solution to the problem. Progressives' idea of redistribution won't really work to close the gap. I've looked for a single example of targeted intervention for an ethnic demographic to increase social mobility and reduce inequality, and they simply do not exist. Any increase in social mobility usually marks an increase in the total social mobility of the country. The welfare interventions from the 60s onwards didn't help the statistical difference between blacks and whites. It also didn't help the UK, or Sweden, or Germany for example. The black underachievement gap affects every single country. And if you look at Gini coefficients, you find that they are similar. Also, the social welfare argument doesn't really hold up either, as marriage rates have declined over the majority of the Western world. PPP and marriage are inversely correlated on a country scale. The more rich you are, the lower the marriage rate. This is an international trend. Blacks just tend to already be at the bottom of SES, but if you look at whites in the same income bracket, similar divorce rates and single motherhood is available. One big thing is that blacks in the top 20% have double the unemployment of whites in the bottom 20%. Trait blacks tend to have less kids that succeed, even if they have high education, high income, so blacks have higher negative social mobility. Schools, when done with a multivariate analysis, have around a 5% effect rate on outcomes, and current interventions on at-risk youths show only 1–2% positive effects on income. The drug war, for example, doesn't really affect father participation in black families statistically. pbs.wim.com web link. pbs.wim.com web link. pbs.wim.com web link. As you can see, being arrested has negligible effect on if a child is separated from his father in the black community, but it has a larger statistical difference in whites, much larger. This is probably due to the fact that the black family is already broken up before the arrest, and that is why it has such a small effect on participation. In addition, jail time is not correlated with how close kids are with their father, or how much they see them. Neither the left nor the right have any real-world solutions. Removing welfare is fucking stupid. You can't fix the problem by throwing income at schools to increase social mobility. It just doesn't work. Both are wrong, and if you critically look at the data, both narratives are fucking overtly simplistic. And BTW, there is a reason I'm a lefty, and it came from careful analysis of various economic policies, and there's a reason I'm a social conservative. It's because I did analysis of family heuristics to end outcomes via multivariate analysis. But I would prefer if you would stop talking about post-truth despite being a linkant that can't not strawman him. The clearly biggest mistake of Peterson is the postmodern neo-Marxist narrative. It doesn't make sense, and he gets it from Stephen Hicks' book Understanding Postmodernism. I could go into specifics, but it's not an accurate portrayal of postmodernism, and ignore many of postmodernism's greater points. But understanding the ontology of postmodernism (BTW) isn't exactly an easy task. So just like how David Pacman doesn't understand IQ, and it is far easier to understand than postmodernism, I'll give a pass to Peterson. Ian Conway at Hexham 7. Strawmanning positions, or taking things out of context, isn't a rebuttal either. Attacking him through a view he doesn't hold via a thought experiment is also not a rebuttal. This Santiago Cabello character literally is listing off 2 points that are thought experiments, or they are straight up what the participants of the study fucking say. If he's talking about the psilocybin research, it's so hilarious. Conway, understand this, we are not reading his mind. Actually what we do is interpolate what he says in different interviews. www.merriam-webster.com web link. You mean extrapolate, right? Here he redefines words to fit his argument, even if that means inventing new meanings that don't actually fit said argument. Oh yeah, using the Durkheim definition of religion. The one used in social science for nearly 100 years. While Madhuhanti is using a made-up definition not even in the dictionary that for some reason has to do with supernatural effects. Not the actual definition of both the social science or the dictionary definition. n.wikipedia.org web link. A religion is a unified system of beliefs and practices relative to sacred things, i.e., things set apart and forbidden beliefs and practices which unite in one single moral community called a church, all those who adhere to them. Religion is an expression of, and a way of creating, social order. God is society, writ large. I hate that people think that Peterson is off the cuff creating new definitions of words. He isn't. He has very clearly stated that he views your religious system as implicit axioms that you yourself don't know. And BTW, there is actually research to back this up. Jonathan Haidt's moral foundations theory clearly demonstrates implicit moral intuitions based upon different levels of axiomatic presuppositions. blogs.scientificamerican.com web link. Great article on it. I also suggest the book, The Righteous Mind. A great book, but if you look at Peterson's arguments through this lens, it supports a lot, not all, of what he says. In addition, Jordan Peterson is obsessed with large-scale game creation for cooperation. At the Monk debate, that we need to create a generic grand narrative in order to organize society. And while I consider this somewhat naive, that's a far easier point to attack than hey guys, here's a fucking straw man thought experiment about women's makeup. I'm fucking smart. Haradar. Hexam 7 Ian Conway. Now, you are just outright lying. The statement made was that historical racism limited blacks' access to wealth, which is undeniably true. Yeah, Latinos didn't suffer years of generational slavery. That difference is what makes it complicated. You are making a false equivalency, while the very point that I made. The issue is whether blacks had limited access to wealth historically, not whether they do better or worse than Latinos, and yet you offered no evidence that most Latinos come to America with little to no wealth. You can't even follow the ethos of your own criticisms even for something that is neither obvious or common knowledge. No citations for your claim that an exact percentage of black wealth inequality is due to lack of fathers in the home's a laughable statement in and of itself, as you also fail to provide any evidence that a significant portion of black families have no father in the picture. Hint. It isn't true, it's just a right-wing appeal to emotion. Further, even your version of the argument did not say that historical racism is the sole reason for blacks having less wealth than average. You are right, only an idiot would think that. Despite your straw man argument again, you only follow your own reasoning when it's convenient for your argument. Something you learned from Peterson?